let's play a game of whose brain can melt the fastest as we talk about the hard problem of consciousness. Okay, this is something that literally keeps me awake at night. It bothers me. I'm sure there are many neuroscientists and philosophers that it bothers too. There's a lot of controversy. Some people don't even say that it exists, and I'm not here to debate whether it exists or not. I want you to know the idea, and I hope that as we look more and more deeply into the brain over the course of the series, that this will begin to bother you more as you begin to wonder about this question. So let's try and summarize it in a sentence. The hard problem asks, why, how, what the hell is happening? How do atoms and molecules and proteins, such that we are made of, moving past each other, these are atoms moving past each other, give rise, explicate into existence the qualia of, this is my coffee cup, this experience that we have, visual qualia, the qualia of the other senses, hearing, touch, pain, taste. All of these things are very strange. How do molecules produce qualia? We don't, for example, suppose that robots, if we create a robot that, I keep coming back to this robot thing, where a robot has some kind of detector for light and that goes through a bunch of circuitry, we just suppose that all of that processing that eventually tells it whether to move forward or backward occurs in the dark. We don't suppose that processing is giving rise to qualia, to an internal sensory representation of that sensory information. And I'll jump over to Wikipedia towards the end just to look at, there are some interesting ways of phrasing the hard problem on there that are good to look at. So, this is something that, if you go to university, and I did this, and go and study quantum mechanics, molecular dynamics, the qualia do not seem to emerge on any level from studying molecular dynamics or mathematics, from understanding the various fields and forces that govern the atomic world and the processes of the physical world. There is no room in the equations that seems to produce qualia in the universe. So, another way to perhaps think about it is to compare the hard problem of consciousness with the easy problem of consciousness. And I bet I can find, if I go to Google, I bet I can find a picture of, let's try Chalmers. Is it going to bring it up? I might have to type David Chalmers. David Chalmers. Here we go. This is the guy. This is David Chalmers, and this is Dude Has a Hard Problem. Brilliant. This is the guy that kind of coined this phrase, is credited with this, and the distinction between the hard problem and the easy problem. And it's one way to understand the hard problem is to contrast it with the easy problem. The easy problem is considered easy because it's thought that we will probably solve it, whereas the hard problem is sometimes said that we don't even know how to begin to approach it. This gap between physical movement of atoms and this qualia, this phenomenological experience that we're having, is sometimes called the explanatory gap, and you'll perhaps see that phrase around. The easy problem is sometimes associated with words like need, sufficient, and necessary, and neural correlates. I'll do a video next on neural correlates because it's a brilliant field. But the idea is that the easy problem asks not how molecules produce qualia, but only looks for various parts of the brain that correlate the neural correlates of certain types of consciousness. So perhaps we could find a part of the brain that is active when we're perceiving the coffee cup, and then we could say perhaps that part of the brain is a neural correlate, and if we could destroy that part of the brain, we would become unable to perceive coffee cups. Our brain would be unable to produce the qualia of coffee cups or something like that. The easy problem then asks, what parts of the brain are sufficient for producing consciousness, for producing the perception of motion, the recognition of faces, as we've already seen. But we can answer all of these by analysing every part of the brain and finding out how they correlate by stimulating those parts of the brain and seeing how perception changes. But to do that, we would never ever need to answer how qualia are literally produced in the universe by the atoms and neurons in that part of the brain. We're just kind of looking for a correlation. So that's the easy problem against the hard problem. Another way to perhaps look at this is something that I like to think about personally, which is to think about a metaphor you may be familiar with once I show you a picture of it. Let's get rid of Chalmers. Which I'll type in Cartesian theatre. Theatre, there it is, it comes up straight away. This was, I think, by Dan Dennett. Yes, there's Dan Dennett and his lovely beard. And the Cartesian theatre is this idea that there's this kind of movie being played in the brain, and we're kind of observing it. Of course, this is not what is happening at all. We said in the first video that there is no image in the brain that really takes the shape of what's out there. It doesn't seem. There is no movie screen literally in the brain. It's instead neural activity. But I like this idea of a projector just to illustrate this point of the hard problem. If we have a projector, this is my projector. My projector's round and it has a lens at the front. We know that we have the information that's fed into the projector from the DVD player or something. This could be equivalent to our eyes feeding information to the brain. That information passes around a bunch of circuitry, and the projector then takes that information, turns it into photons of light, and hurls those photons across space, across the room, and that light then falls on a screen, and we can look at that screen and see then the visual image that's been produced, and we know that image is made out of pixels or photons of light that have landed on that screen. On my computer monitor it would be pixels. But in the brain, through what angle, in what direction do neurons point their beam? We know that the movie that we're seeing exists within the physical boundary of the brain, within the space that the brain occupies. But where is it? Through what angle does the brain point its beam to produce qualia? In what direction is the beam pointed to produce this image of the cup? How is that produced? In what kind of sense? So that's one way I just like to think about it. Let's jump across to Wikipedia then, just to type in the hard problem of consciousness. I'll type it into the main search. Hard problem of consciousness. It comes up first very quickly. The hard problem of consciousness, and some of the ways, here we are, that it's been formulated. These are just sentences that have been used that probably say it better than I ever could. Which is, why should physical processing give rise to any inner life at all? This kind of relates to our robot. Why do we presume the robot operates in the dark with no awareness of its sensory experience, whereas we have these qualia? How is it that some organisms are the subjects of experience, and why does awareness of sensory information exist at all? Why do qualia exist? Why is there a subjective component to experience? Why aren't we philosophical zombies? And philosophical zombies is kind of this idea of the robot operating in the dark. Why are we not operating in the dark? Why does our biology produce qualia? How does it produce qualia? I really like T.H. Huxley's remark here, which is how it is that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about as a result of irritating nervous tissue is just as unaccountable as the appearance of the jinn when Aladdin rubbed his lamp. I'm sorry you can't see some of that. I've just realised the border of my video there. And even as far back as Isaac Newton, we have this sentence, to determine by what modes or actions light produceth in our minds the phantasm of colour is not so easy. And phantasm is a great word. Our brains really do make it seem like we're looking out upon the world, but we must remember that this whole thing is a phantasm produced within the brain, and how it is that brains produce these sensations in the universe is just very, very, very strange, and that really encapsulates the hard problem for me. And I just want you to keep this in mind as we look deeper and deeper into the brain at how annoyingly absent qualia are as we look into the mechanics of the brain.